want to talk a little bit quickly. We are starting a series called I Am, and we're going to look at how Jesus made this statement consistently over and over and over again. He talked about being, he says, I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and the light. He talked about I am the good shepherd. He talked about a lot of things, and he always started off with I am. And if we were in that time when Jesus was walking the earth, we would have known the Old Testament through and through. That when he made those statements that he says, I am, we would know what he was referring to, what God spoke to his people earlier. And so as we're going to go through the series, we wanted to take a time of just looking at what it means to really go into that place of what does it mean when Jesus said, I am, and why did he say that? And we're going to go through those statements that Jesus made in the next 7 weeks. But we're going to look at why did he start us off by saying, I am? Why was it so important? What is the history behind it? And if we know the history behind it, we'll be able to get to that place. We'll be able to get to that place where Jesus really talked about, I am the way. And when he said, I am the truth. I love this one. He says, I am the bread of life. And then he talked about being, I am the good shepherd. And then he said, I am the light of the world. And then he also said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. And the last one, Pastor Olivia and I, we were sitting down this week, we were talking about this series, and we were both getting really excited about looking at what God is doing and what this series is really all about. And then she came out and she said, we need to end with this one, where Jesus said, I am the true vine. And we're going to end this 8-week series starting this week with the last one will be, I am the true vine. And we'll be looking at all of this aspect, but today we're going to build that foundation. We're going to really talk about Exodus chapter 3. We're going to really look at and take an opportunity just to open up Exodus chapter 3. But before we can get to Exodus chapter 3, we need to really know what Moses was doing, what was happening in Moses' life to have this encounter with God. What was happening, where it was going. So in chapter 1 of Exodus, and I'm just going to go through it very, very quickly, just literally lay this foundation so that we understand this aspect. See, the Israelites were working and being slaves in Egypt at this time. And their numbers were increasing. So they were having babies after babies after babies, and their number continually increased in Egypt. And Pharaoh, he was oppressing the Israelites. He was trying to keep them down. He said this in chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal swiftly with them, lest they multiply and a war break out. They join our enemies and fight against us and escape from our land. See, Pharaoh, he was one who was, he needed to stop what was happening with the Israelites. He wanted to make sure and keep them oppressed. He wanted to have his authority over these people. And so he was in this stage where he says, we got to do something here. We have to change. This is where he went to his midwives who were delivering the babies of the Israelite people. And he said to them, any male that is born must be killed. Every single male child. And that means that any Israelite that was born had to be killed at that point in time. Now Moses was born, and his mom hid him for a period of time. But she knew she couldn't keep him hidden for very long. And Pharaoh's sister was in the waters, and she made this basket, and she put him in it, and she pushed it over. And she retrieved Moses. And what the fact is then in chapter 2, Moses went from being an Israelite, being a slave, to now living in Pharaoh's house, being in the house, being a prince, being someone who was now educated, getting all the education that he needed, getting to a place where he was, there was no need for food for him. He didn't have to labor like his people, the Israelites. He was now living in a place where things were going good. And in chapter 2, it talks about where he went out when he was a young man to see what was happening. And there was a man, one of the Egyptians, was beating the Israelites, and that didn't sit well with him. He's seen that these are my people, and they're being not treated well. And he attacked that man and he killed that man. And now Moses went off into the wilderness and left because he knew if he stayed there, he would have to serve the consequences of just killing an Egyptian. And so off he went. He went off into this wilderness. He had met a family. He married one of these ladies. He worked for his father-in-law diligently. He was in the wilderness for 40 years. And then we get to chapter 3. And we're just going to we're going to look at chapter 3, and we're just going to open it up, and we're going to really see what chapter 3, and there is a lot in chapter 3 of Exodus. And there is a lot in here to really just to take a look at and see why God really wanted to talk about I am who I am. So Moses is in the wilderness. He's out in the field. He's attending to the flock. And here we start in verse 1 and 2. It says, Now Moses was keeping the flock for his father-in-law, Gerald, a priest of Midland. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, but yet not consumed. Now, I went and got one of our Christmas decorations because I thought, well, how are we going to look at having a bush? So he's out in the wilderness, a bush burning out in the wilderness, all of a sudden combustibly going up in flames, is not something unique out in the wilderness, out in the desert. It is something normal. But what was happening here is that bush was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. It still looked the same. There was no change in this one. But there was a couple of things that happened. There was an angel that appeared in that bush. There was an angel there. So now there's a couple of things. One, that bush is on fire, but it should have just went up and burned up and been gone in within a couple of minutes, but it is still burning, and now there is an angel in there, and it was not yet being consumed. And so this was different than any other kind of fire that was happening in the wilderness. This was something completely different. Verse 3 says, And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why this bush is not burnt. Now Moses is off in the wilderness with doing and looking after the flock, and he sees this, and he says, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn over and look at this, because this is something great that I have never seen before. And he wants to turn and go and look at this bush. Verse 4 to 6 says, When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid. Now there's a lot in this little passage that he has said. See, now God had seen that Moses, seeing this great thing in verse 3, and turns to come over, God sees him and says, Hold it here. Moses, stop. Don't come near. He wants him to see that, hold it, stop. And see, there's a couple of things that God wants us to understand. First of all, if God is here and he's burning in that bush, he wants us to know that there's a distance between us and God. There is something between us. We cannot just come up into the bush because we would be consumed. God wanted us to know that there was a distance between us. But also he wanted us to look at this bush and see that there were some different things about this bush. One is it had thorns. It had thorns. This was a prickly bush. You could say it was a tumbleweed or whatever it was that was burning in the wilderness, and it was thorns on it. And later we know that our King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who we just celebrated Easter, who went on the cross for all of us, he had a crown of thorns on his head. The bush was red, burning in flames. And if that bush is burning in flames, we know that Jesus, we just celebrated communion this morning, that he shed his blood for us. The thing that I love is what are the first two words we heard out of God's mouth when he referred to Moses? He called him by name. He said, Moses, Moses. The first two words he said to Moses. He knew his name. Now Moses, and if we read the story of Moses and we fully understand, Moses was a murderer, fleeing from the country that he knew. the lifestyle that he had lived. He had been fleeing from it. Now God, who is in this bush, who is in there and burning, now is calling him by name. I wonder how many times we need to hear God call our name. Are we hearing him call our name? Are we in the times when we really need to hear God call our name? Are we stopping and turning from our busy life? Moses was looking after the flock. He turned from looking after the flock because there was something great happening. He turned and went to it, and now God called them by name. I wonder how many of us are missing hearing God call our name because we're still tending the flock. We're still being busy. We're still doing everything else that was going on in our life, and we're forgetting that God wants to call our name. But you see, that wasn't the first time God called somebody by name. He called Abraham. When he met Abraham, he said, Abraham, Abraham. He repeated Abraham's name. It's just like he did with Moses. The same with Samuel. He said, Samuel, Samuel, Simon, Simon, Martha, Martha, Saul, Saul. Right now, God is calling on us, and he's calling our names. We need to stop and know that he's calling our name. Our name. I want to tell you that when I was sick these last 3 weeks, there was a time when that Cheryl would say, all I was doing was calling on the Lord. There was nothing else I could do. I was in a place, my world was violently spinning out of control. Absolutely craziness. And all I could do, Lord help. The only words I could speak. But I knew that if I just called on him, he would call me. He would call my name. And sometimes we need to stop to hear that name. We need to stop and hear our name. We need to stop and say, what is it that God wants me to hear? What is it that he wants me to see? Because Moses, he just didn't call him just to say hello. He called them because there was work for Moses to do. He called on him so that he would do it. But in verse 5, he says, do not come near. So he wanted us to know that there's that separation that was happening, that there was distance between us. But the last thing he said was, take off your shoes. We have shoes and sandals, and in those days he had sandals, and he said to Moses, take off your shoes. You're on holy ground. And there's a couple of things that we need to understand about that aspect. One is that if we take off our shoes, it is a place of humility that Moses was put in. That he was now told to take off his shoes because the rich had shoes. The elite had shoes. If you were poor, you didn't have shoes at that time. Now Moses is being told to take off your shoes. Be like the poor. Be like the servants. If you were a servant at that time, you served without your shoes on. You were working in the house. And one of the things that I see today is, what is the first thing you do when you come and visit somebody? First thing I do when I walk into your door is I take off my shoes. Now God's saying, this is holy ground. Don't come near. Take off your shoes. Now Moses now could feel the ground under his feet. That ground that God had made. That ground that is so important for God for us to know. I keep saying to Cheryl that one day we're going to go to Israel. And when we do, I'm going to walk in the wilderness like Moses and say, this is holy ground. I will not put my shoes on. I will want to feel the ground that Moses felt under his feet. The ground that is walked. I want to know that God wants this. I want to know why I want to be in that place of full humility that Moses was put in right then and there. God wanted us to know. Then verse 6, he wanted to remind him who he's talking to. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face and looked at God reminded us who's now speaking to him. See, when we read the Old Testament, we understand when God spoke, he spoke in words, and he always reminded us who served him, who was his servants, who honored and worshiped him, who led this people, who were the ones that God wanted us to do. He wanted us to know that. He reminded us who he was. And I love the fact that Moses, when he now knows who it is that's speaking in that bush, in that flame, that magnificent series, he then hid his face, realizing that who he is speaking to, he needs to honor more than ever. He needs to now, oh my goodness, I am now speaking, and who's speaking to me, calling me by name, calling me to something that's happening that I've never seen happen before. He's now calling and talking to me. That God that spoke to Abraham, that God that spoke to our fathers, that God that spoke to Isaac and Jacob, is now speaking to Moses. And Moses knew that all those other times God had said, don't look at me, hide your face. Immediately Moses knew to hide, to not to look at God. He knew that there was a separation that had to happen. He knew that what was going on was important. Verses 7 to 10. Here come some words that I'm going to have some difficulty with, but we're going to get through it. Then the Lord said, I am surely seen the afflictions of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cries because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to a place where the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Moronites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and then this one, I'm just going to jump over. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. I just, when I looked at that passage, I just sat and just marveled over this passage for a long time. Verse 7 talks about God. Immediately, he sees the oppression of his people. He shows his love of the Israelites. See, at that time, it was the Israelites. Unless you were an Israelite, you were not part of his kingdom. You had to be an Israelite. And he was seeing everything was happening. He was hearing their cries. He was knowing what was going on. When I was looking at this, I was sitting there, and at that time I've told you that Cheryl and I was yelling out to the Lord, Lord, come, Lord, come, Lord, come. Lord, I need you. He was hearing my cries. And I wonder, sometimes we get into that place where we call out to the Lord, and we call on to him, and we call on to him, and we don't see anything changing. We say, is he hearing me? Is he really hearing me? The Israelites were serving in Egypt for many, many, many years. And I'm going to use my brain. I'm thinking 400 years they were serving in Egypt. Calling out to the Lord, help us. Deliver us from these people. And they're still there being oppressed, being pushed down. And now all of a sudden, God is having this conversation with Moses, telling him that he's hearing their cries. He's hearing the oppression. He wants us to know that he is distant from us, that there is separation between us and God. He also wants to know that he cares for us. And he cares for our needs. He cares for who we are and what we need. I love the fact in verse 10, he says, I will come and send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring the people of Israel, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. You see, he's telling Moses, come, I will send you. I'm going to send you. You're going. You're going to go somewhere. I don't know about you, but that could be a little bit confusing and concerning to Moses. He's now being told, I'm going to send you back to the land, the place where you're going to be accused of being a murderer. I'm going to send you to the one who can condemn you, can charge you, and kill you because of what you've done. I'm going to put you in front of him. and Moses is the one being asked. But I love the fact in verse 8 says this, and God is when he's speaking, he says, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. God has come down. He says, I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. But I'm sending you. Go and stand in front of them. But I've come down to deliver them. Now Moses, hold it here, God. You're really, like, I would be saying, you call me to stand in front of Pharaoh. But you're coming down to deliver them. Why send me? Why me? Why would I go? I love the fact that if we look in 2 Corinthians 6:1, the 4 words right there says, working together with him. God wants us to know that we are nothing without him. That we need him in our lives. We need God to be walking with us. We need him to come down to be with us. That we can't do anything without him. Without what's going on, without God coming down and being in us, we can't do anything. And he wants to work with us. He could just do it, just like that. Anything and everything. There's nothing God can't do. But he wants you and I to participate in his miracle. He wants us to be a part of his miracle. Not that we are the miracle or performing the miracle, because it is all God, but he wants us to work with him to perform these miracles. And he's asking Moses to do this. Even after 40 years, he's asking Moses to do this. And see, in verse 11 it says, but Moses said to God, see, I know this is where there's confusion. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Who am I? I'm nothing. I'm out here in Midland working. I met a woman. She's my wife. I've been working on the farm. That's my life. Who am I to go and deal this? Who am I? I'm not worthy to be able to be the servant. And sometimes we get to that place, a lot of us will get to that place where we're saying, I'm not worthy to do this work that he's called me to do. I'm not worthy to be a part of what he's doing. But God, when he calls us, he doesn't worry about your worthiness. He worries about your heart. Are you willing to serve me? Then I want to call you to go. If you're willing to do what I ask you, amazingly he will send us. Verse 12 says, he said, but I will be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have been brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. See, God now is letting Moses know, hey, you're going to serve me right now where you are on this mountain that you are at. You're going to serve me when the people of Egypt, when the Israelites come out of Egypt, and you are out, you are going to serve me on this mountain, at this place. A place that Moses knows very well because he's been working it for 40 years. It's something that he knows. He knows the land. He wants us to know how important it is that we work with him. He wants us to know that this is happening. He wants us to know that no matter what else is happening, he is going to be able to fulfill our needs because he's going to be with us. Verses 13 and 14 says, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them that the God of your fathers sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was coming to meet you for the very first time, and I came up to Carrie and I said, hi, Carrie, I'm Bruce, who are you? She would say, I'm Carrie. When God said, I am who I am, didn't really tell us, who is he? But then he said, go to the people and say this, I am has sent me. You see, now Moses is now stating, hey, I remember the stories of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. I remember those stories of when they had that encounter with God. He talked about I am. your God. Now Moses is now realizing now who he is, fully who he's talking to and how he's talking to it. It is a very simple statement, I am who I am. He's saying God is God. There's no equal. There's God equals God. It's God doesn't equal man. And God isn't Superman. Like we can look at he's not a Superman, and he's not an extraordinary man. He is God. And when he's having this encounter with Moses, he's letting Moses know, I am who I am. And that brings us to that place of us to understanding that there is no comparison to God. And there is no equal to him. And it was only him. And when you go to them and say that I am who I am, and you say these things, that's all you need. You don't need to say anything more. You don't need to do anything more. You know, when we look at the things, God says, I am the light of the world. So when darkness comes in on our lives, when we're in that place of darkness, he says, I am the light. I mean, that's all we need. We don't need anything more. When we're in bondage and we have things that are happening in our lives and we feel like we're in a cage and we can't get out of things, God says, I am freedom. And when we're needing food, God says, I am the bread of life. And he wants us to remember that when we need guidance and we need direction in our lives, he says, I am the good shepherd. He wants us to know at that moment, all we need is him. There's nothing more you and I need. We have everything that we need. We have separation from God. We know who he is. And we also know that he is all that we need. You see, when he says, I am who I am, he's inviting us to know who he is. He wants us to know this. See, sometimes we get to this place in life where we start thinking, and if you're new, you're going to think this way because I did. Who is this God? How can he be so powerful? I don't know who he is. I'm going to say this, and I want to encourage you to read God's promises in this book. If you're new and you don't know what they are, just pick the Bible up and start reading his promises to us. He has amazing promises that he tells us. And then when you find and read those promises that he tells us that he has for us. I love the one who hit, and I knew this because when I was sick, I knew that he was still with me because he says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. I love the fact that when I was sick and in trouble, I knew he was still with me. I knew that he had all I needed. I just needed to rely that he was going to provide everything that I needed. And if you're new, I want to encourage you to look at those and then ask him to reveal himself to you. He's inviting Moses into understanding who he is. He's inviting us also to understand who he is. That I am who I am. And that when we look at that aspect, Moses had a great encounter. Verses 15 through 18 says, God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you, and that has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up and out of the afflictions of the Egyptians to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hittites, and that other word, and the land of flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to our God. I love the fact that here, this encounter now, God's telling Moses what he needs to do. He's now giving him clear, precise directions. This is what you're going to do. He gave him a 2-step process. He said, first go to the elders. Tell them that you're having this encounter with me. Tell them that I'm talking to you. Tell them that I see the afflictions of what's going on. I've heard your cries. I know what's happening to you. And I'm come to take you out of the land of Egypt. Then second, go in front of the king. And then the last thing he said to Moses is, they will hear your voice. Not God's voice. They will hear your voice. So when God says that I want to work together with you, now I'm sending you out, and you're going to go and you're going to talk to the elders of Israel. You're going to talk to the ones who have influence over the people, and they're going to hear your voice. See, amazingly, God calls us, when he calls us to go, he wants you and I to know that people will hear our voice when God sends us. When we have an encounter with God of a burning bush, of any kind of situation, he wants us to know that the people will hear your voice and that they know that I have sent you. And we're going to finish off chapter 3 here in verses 19 through 22. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by the mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonder that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of Egypt. And when they go, you shall not go empty. Each woman shall ask their neighbor and any woman who lives in their house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. I love the fact that now he tells them this is what's going to happen. The first thing he says is, you're going to walk up in front of Pharaoh, you're going to go in front of the king, and you're going to say, hey, let my people go. We want to go, we're going to go on a 3-day journey, and we're going to go on a 3-day holiday. Just let us go away and do this for 3 days. And then God said to him, but Pharaoh's going to say, no. Now I sat there and I look at that. Why did God let Moses know that I'm sending you and standing in front of the Egyptian king, and you're going to tell him, let my people go, let the Hebrew people, let us leave and go sacrifice to our God? And then he's going to say no. See, God wanted Moses to know that it's not by his power and not by his words that things are going to happen. It's only by his power. And he wanted Moses to know that he wouldn't be surprised when Pharaoh says, you're not going anywhere. I'm going to make it harder on your people. I'm not going to let your people go. I'm going to make it harder on you. But then God says, then I'm going to do my works. He's going to do his wonders. He's going to do what he's called to be done. And see, God wanted Moses to know that it wasn't him who got the people out, that it is him who got the people out. But I'm going to use you as our channel to take us down that path. And God wanted him to know that this was happening and that it wasn't a wonder. You see, we learned this morning that there's separation between us and God, that there's distance between us. But he also hears and knows our needs. He also wants us to know that he wants to draw near to us. He also tells us that he knows the future. He already knew before Moses went in front of Pharaoh, he already knew Pharaoh's going to say no. So God's letting us know that he knows the future. He knows what's happening. And so if something is happening in our lives, he already knows it. It's not surprise. It's not like, oh, that surprised me. It might surprise us. It didn't surprise God. My grandchildren like to jump out and scare me. My granddaughter did that yesterday. She jumped out and scared me. She was in our office, and I came in, and she jumped out of the office, and I was startled. But God knew that was happening. We can't surprise God. Nothing that happens in our life is a surprise to him. And so he wants us to know that he knows the future. And God also wants us to know that he reveals himself to the humble. Are we being too prideful? Are we not hearing God's voice and we're saying, hey, God hasn't released me to do this or do that. God hasn't sent me this place. Or maybe we're not humbling ourselves like Moses did in the wilderness and stopped and had that encounter with God. See, Moses hid his face, took his shoes off, realized he was in there. And the last thing is that God wants us to know that he's way more important than what Moses did. Moses, you're going to do this, but I'm way more important than anything that you can do. And see, God wants us to remember that He is way more important than us, and that we need to be seeking Him way more than what we are doing. We need to be looking for Him more than we need to be looking for ourselves. We need to be walking with Him more than we were walking with ourselves. And so now when we come to Jesus, who walked this earth, and that who we talked about on that cross, who was died on that cross for you and I, who died for all of us, when He made the statements when He was walking on the earth, and He made these statements, I am the way. You see, when He made those statements, I am the way, immediately everyone knew the story. Immediately everyone knew that God, that this Jesus, He's saying He's that man who was in the bush. He's saying that that man who was talking, that God who was talking to Moses in the wilderness, now Jesus is saying that's Him, because He is saying this. And that is where the troubles came. But Jesus wanted us to know that this encounter with Moses and this encounter that was happening, that it was important. That so when He said He is the way, or that He says I am the truth, that we would understand who we're talking to. Who is talking to us? When He says I am the bread of life, when we look at that aspect, we want us to understand that we are now talking to that same God that was talking to Moses. That there is no difference between, that we understand that He is the good shepherd, that I am the light of the world. Jesus wanted us to remember that no matter what, that once we ask Him into our lives, once we said, Jesus, I don't know who you are, but reveal yourself to me, come to me, so that I get to know who you are. The moment you ask Him in, you're no longer walking in any darkness. The darkness is gone. We can have dark times where we feel that we're not walking in the light, but I'm going to tell you that all those dark times, Jesus said, I am the light. That light has not been squashed. That light is still in each and every one of us. And that light is just wanting just to grow in us, to realize and for us to understand. When He says, I am the light of the world, we understand that that's the encounter with Moses that He wants us to refer to. When He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, I am the beginning. See, Jesus made this statement that I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning. That means before the earth was born, I am the Alpha. And then I am the Omega. I am the end. There's not that He is all. And then the last statement where He said, I am the true vine. The true vine. And we're going to go through all of those as Jesus talked about those aspects. And I want to encourage you, we have life groups that are starting up this week. We're going to look at this God of I am. We're going to look at this encounter. We're going to look at how this encounter with Moses is so important that we understand it, so that we understand the fact that when we start seeing Jesus and He starts making these same statements, that we understand the God that we're talking about. That we understand the fullness of it all. Worship team, come on up. This morning, I'm feeling as the worship team's coming up, God is, some of us are in a place where we're feeling like we're in that darkness. We're feeling that God, that who is that light, that He is in that bush that is burning. Like I was smiling every time I look at it and I see the Christmas lights. It's not consuming the tree. The bush that Moses that he had encountered is still perfect. Nothing blemished. It's still all good. Sometimes we get to that place in our lives where we say, I'm in that dark place that I'm broken, I'm no good, this is happening in my life, and I'm no longer able to do what I need to do. But God says, I still am the God of I am. I'm the one who wants to show you my power. And this morning, if you have something that is ailing, or something that is hurting, or something that you need some prayer, I'm going to ask Glenn to come and join me up here. As the worship team is playing and we're singing, if there's something in your life that you just say, hey, I want someone to come and just pray over me, because I want to have that encounter with God, the God of I am. I want to have a new encounter. I want to have something that light that feels like it's just being covered. I want that light to be uncovered. I want to see that light that's shining in me. I want to feel the power that Jesus placed inside me. If you're wanting to have prayer this morning, I just want to encourage you to come on up and pray with us.